All I had to do is get my magic number first. I already took care of 120,000, so I could subtract by that. All I have left over is the last section is at 25%, which is the remainder over 120,000. Welcome to the last video in the residential load calculation series. We're going to be looking at the magic number when we have over 120,000 square feet per volt amps, or what some people might call the feet squared volt amps. This is when we have the square footage of our house, we times it by 3 volt amps, and then we add the 4,500. We also might multiply the amount of units that we have, and then we get into the demand factors. This is for the general lighting load portion of the load calculation. If you have any questions about how we get any of these answers, check out my videos in this playlist, starting with the first video to get those answers. Or you can also ask some questions in the comments and I'll respond to them. I regularly check this YouTube channel. Okay, we want to open our codebook up and we want to look at table 220.42. It tells us that with dwelling units, the first 3,000 is at 100%. From 3,001 to 120,000, we have that at 35%, and the remainder over 120,000 is at 25%. We've probably already done this enough times to know what this means. I'm going to do a quick example and actually solve for it, so you're going to see me using the load calculations. But the whole point of this is we're going to get the magic number, it's called. So when we have the first two sections here, the first 3,000 at 100%, and then the next 3,001 to 120,000 is at 35%. Those are two different sections, and those first two sections are always going to equal the same number if we're over 120,000. So let's see what happens when we take 120,000 just through the first two stages and see what number we come up with. And then I'm going to give us a number that's bigger than 120,000, and we're going to solve for that, and we're going to see how the magic number that it's called is going to be very helpful. And it's less of a number that you're going to memorize, and it's more of a number that you're going to recognize. So you're going to see it, it's pretty simple, and you're going to know, okay, yeah, that is the magic number. And you can also solve for it very quickly to double check at the same time. So if we have 120,000 volt amps per square foot, we know that we're going to have the first 3,000 at 100%. So right off the bat, we can subtract that 3,000. I like to say that we put it off to the side. So we can put it off to the side here and label it as 3,000 at 100%. I'm going to give this a quick circle just so then I remember this is a number that I'm going to add back later on. From here, we're going to have 117,000, and we're going to need to multiply the rest of this at 35%. I'm going to explain a little bit more after I get into this. But after we multiply this by 35%, we're going to get 40,950. Now we just need to add back that 3,000 we put aside, and now we have 43,950. Of course, this is going to be volt amps, and this is your magic number, 43,950 volt amps. So it's pretty simple, and after you see it enough times, you're going to recognize it. But now we can do it really quickly on our calculator. We can just plug in 120,000, subtract 3,000, multiply by 35%, and then add 3,000 to that. And we're always going to get that same number, and we know that that number is the first two sections. And now the reason why this is the first two sections is because we have 120,000, and if we look at the first two sections, the first section is at 3,000, but the next section is at 3,001 through 120,000. Because it wants the first 3,000 at 100%, we're always taking that away and then adding it back later. So the next section is 3,001 through 120,000, and because of that, it has 3,000 taken away from it already. So technically this section has 117,000 in its capacity. But of course, it's easier just to think that before you take away the first 3,000, if your number is 120,000 or above, you're always going to have the first two sections equaling the same number. Okay, so now what happens if we are over 120,000? And to simply sum it up, we're going to take that remaining number and we're going to have it at 25%, and then we're going to add it back to this magic number, or the total of the first two sections, which is always going to be the same number. Okay, so now let's look at an example with a bigger number. I'm going to erase all this, so if you need to write anything down, now is the time. So let's say we have 139,000 volt amps per square foot. I'm just going to label it like this. We have the foot squared volt amps. So we know we always have the first 3,000 at 100%. So we're going to have to subtract 3,000. I like to just put it off to the side and then label it 3,000 at 100%, just so it's really easy to look at and see. Okay, that's going to give us 136,000. And then our next section is 3,001 to 120,000. So since we already took 3,000 off of the first section, we're only having 117,000 in our next section. So in fact, we're just going to have to subtract by 117,000, and you can easily solve for this in your head and get this 117,000 number. You just take 120,000 and you subtract 3,000. We're not only subtracting this 117,000, but we're also putting it off to the side. Just like the 3,000, we're putting it off to the side, but this time we're putting the 117,000 off to the side at 35%, so we need to multiply by 0.35. Okay, again, I'm going to circle this one. I'm going to leave some room for the answer there. And then we get onto the next section. We're going to get 136,000 minus 117,000. From there, we're going to get 19,000. It's always good to label everything as you go. I just don't want to keep mentioning that and labeling everything a million times, but in real life, you're going to want to label everything so you don't second guess yourself. Okay, we know that the remainder is going to be at 25%, so we have to multiply that by 0.25. Now that I have everything set up, I'm just going to do my first two sections because I know that's supposed to give me a magic number. Let's pretend I haven't done this in a little while and I don't remember exactly what my magic number is, but if I see it, I'm probably going to remember it. Okay, and everything's already solved in front of me right here. If I'm maybe stressed and I kind of forget what to do, it's all in the steps of solving this. So I'm just looking at what I have here. I have 3,000 at 100%, and then I have 117,000 at 35%. So first I need to do the 117,000 at 35%, and I'm going to get 40,950. I'm going to add back that 3,000 there. Things already look familiar here. Now I have that 43,950. I like to label everything, so I'm just going to call this M number, magic number, so I can actually label it with something, and I can just look at it real quick and know what this is associated with. Of course, I know my magic number is the first two sections, so now I could either disregard these, or I could just kind of draw a little squiggly line to remind myself, okay, I already took care of both of those, and I have my magic number, which furthermore tells me that. And then with my 43,950, it's pretty simple because you know that the second section always has 117,000, just like I explained, you can solve for that. And since it's at 35%, you're always going to get 40,950. And now why I think this is easy is because you're always going to get 40,000, and then you're going to have to add 3,000. So you always have this 0 here, which changes to the 3 because you have to add back the 3,000. These little things are just things that can help you associate yourself with this number and remember it once you see it again. Okay, so now that I did the first two sections and I know I got the correct number for the magic number, now I know I'm doing everything correctly and I can move on to the very last section, which is simply the 19,000 at 25%. It's going to give me 4,750. Of course, this is volt amps. And now all I have to do is add my magic number to this number. And at the end of this, I'm going to show you a much quicker way to do this if you just know how to get your magic number and know what the magic number is. Let's say you have multiple questions that are going to be over 120,000 volt amps and they are dwellings. Then you can just have your magic number written down, and I'm going to show you a quicker way once I get done with this. Okay, so all that we have to do now is add the magic number, or 43,950 volt amps, to the 4,750 volt amps that we got with the remainder over 120,000 at 25%. We are going to get 48,700. And make sure you do that a second time and get the same answer, and make sure you also double check other things throughout this as you're going along, and make sure you get the same answer when you do the same thing 2 different times. We have a few different sections here, so you can double check a few times along the way. And now we know the total volt amps for this section, which would be the general lighting load section. And we used our knowledge and familiarity of the magic number to help us, because once we got that, we knew we were doing everything correctly. And then the last step is just getting the remainder at 25%, and that's all pretty simple. the one thing to remember is that when you're over 120,000, if you're doing the method I just showed you, you're going to have to subtract the 3,000, get that at 100%. And then the next section, you're subtracting 117,000 since you already took off the 3,000 from the first section. Things can kind of get a little complicated there. You have to remind yourself it's not 120,000, it's 117,000. It's pretty easy, but things can get a little bit weird here. This method might actually work better for you. But let's check out the second method, because if you understand this, then this might be a lot simpler and quicker, especially if you have multiple units that are going to be over 120,000. Okay, now I'm going to show you the simpler method. Let's say we have 139,000 volt amps per square foot, just like I was saying before, the same exact scenario. This time, instead of writing a bunch of stuff down, I'm just going to get those first two sections out of the way right away. I'm going to get out my calculator. I'm going to do 120,000, and I'm going to subtract 3,000 from that. And then I'm going to multiply that by 35%, and then I'm going to add back my 3,000 to that, and I can already recognize that I have what I call my magic number. Now I'm going to write that down, my 43,950, and I've now seen this enough times that I know this is my magic number. It is familiar now, and I'm going to label it M number. Since I already took care of my first two sections, I already took care of 120,000. Of course, I started with 120,000 on my calculator here. So because of that, I can subtract 120,000 from my 139,000. From here, I'm going to have 19,000 left over. I can multiply that by 25%, and I get 4,750 volt amps. And all that I have to do from here is add back my magic number to this. So I'm going to add 43,950 volt amps to my 4,750 volt amps. That's going to give me a total of 48,700. So you see I got the same exact answer as before, but that was a lot quicker. Of course, the first time I was also explaining some stuff, so that made it go by a little bit slower, but we can see that this is a much quicker way of going about it. All I had to do is get my magic number first. I already took care of 120,000, so I could subtract by that. All I have left over is the last section, is at 25%, which is the remainder over 120,000. I had 19,000. I did it by 25%. I got 4,750, so it's just like before. And then I added the magic number, and I got the same exact answer as before. So you can decide which method works for you better. And now you know that you have both of those methods, and you can also familiarize yourself with this magic number. Just make sure you solve it a few times on your own. Write it down, maybe hang up a piece of paper in your house with it on the wall or something so you could look at it. And after you see it enough times, it'll just be something that's familiar. Okay, so that's all for this video. This one's pretty simple and straightforward, and you can imagine where this will help you a lot. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up to show me that you liked it. Give me a comment, say something that you liked about it, or maybe something that you think could improve. Also give me suggestions for newer videos, or maybe even topics that I could go over in my next videos. Of course, if you have any questions about anything, leave that in the comments as well. And if you want to find that load calculation playlist, I'll make sure to put that in the description. So that's the end of this video. Till next time, take care and goodbye.